In my mind, Darwin was the most important person who ever lived on Earth.
What was the achievement of Charles Darwin?
To present the idea of evolution by random genetic change that was then sorted out by natural selection, by the environment. Hence, the origin of diversity of life as we know it on Earth, independent of any outside force. And this then put humanity in a wholly different light, namely as potentially having arisen by this uncontrolled or undesigned process on our own, on this planet, independently.
Charles Darwin's contributions revolutionized science. His ideas are foreign to the daily notions of cause and effect, to the limited human experience of time, and the fundamental illusion of permanence. What is life capable of, given unimaginable tracts of time?
We can really now see human evolution, and we can go out and begin to see the differences between the DNA of an Eskimo and someone who's living in the tropics. And so we really can now see evolution occurring at the level of DNA, which Darwin couldn't.
Because Darwin knew his ideas were revolutionary, he spent decades compiling supporting evidence for his theory, starting with the finches that he discovered in the Galapagos. Life is capable of adapting to drastic climates, like the Arctic Circle. Where there is no light, ventworms feed off the heat of tectonic vents at the bottom of the ocean. Life has persisted during the rise and fall of mountains, fading seas and other drastic changes in ecosystems worldwide during billions of trips around the sun. With the changes of time, life has persisted and diversified through natural selection. Those best fit for their environment survive. Darwin's theory elegantly explains the great diversity of life found on Earth. The protean nature of our world is visible in the wilds and in our genes. Like all contributions to science, natural selection helps us understand our place in the universe.
Not only did he cover an immense amount of material, geology and biology,
Yes.
but the man was always right.
Evolution through natural selection is a foundational principle of modern biology, backed by an enormous amount of data. The theory explains the persistence and diversity found in the kingdoms of life on Earth. In academia, Darwin holds a distinguished place among the great scientists in the history of knowledge. In recognition of his achievements, Charles Darwin was entombed next to Isaac Newton at Westminster Abbey in April of 1882. Darwin's discovery explains the persistence and diversity of life on Earth, but to date, it does not explain how life originated. And like all great discoveries, more questions arise. This gray area is the subject of much controversy.
I think there are a number of factors that could be involved here. One of the factors could be insufficiencies in science education, the inability or the weakness of communicating both what evolution is and how biological evidence and the general context of the way in which science done supports evolutionary theory. I think another factor could be the power of people's formation within churches, within what they're taught within churches, the types of biblical interpretation that they are given within churches to inform what they believe about issues such as these. I think a third thing that I would point out is that it really doesn't cost most people much to deny the theory of evolution. They're not going to pay much of a price. But there are significant benefits to denying the theory of evolution and affirming a fairly literalistic view of biblical creationism in many of the religious contexts in which these persons move. Well, from the very beginning, there was a mixed response. There were many persons in the context of religious convictions who saw very little problem with evolutionary theory. It fit in well, fit in consistently with their general theological views and their general views about what the Bible is and how the Bible is to be interpreted. At the same time, from the very beginning, there were those who were very much threatened by Darwinian evolution because of their views about what the Bible is, an inerrant source of information not only about theological matters, but also about historical matters and about scientific matters, and also their commitment to a very literal interpretation of texts such as we find in Genesis 1 and 2. if you're not wedded to or committed to inerrancy of the Bible, or holding that the Bible is a text that gives us scientific information, or if you're not committed to a literalistic approach to the interpretation of those texts, which you hold to be inerrant, then you're not going to have the kind of difficulties with evolutionary theory as does the person who is committed to an inerrant text that teaches science and is to be interpreted literally.
Many people have strong opinions about the validity of Darwin's theory of natural selection. Darwin's work can be hard to grasp, such as the contributions of other revolutionary scientists like Albert Einstein. The validity of Einstein's work is rarely questioned. The predictions of his theories are verified by experiment. For instance, the anomaly in Mercury's orbit is due to the warping of space-time, as predicted by general relativity. It's a crazy idea to many that empty space can stretch like a rubber band, but it has been confirmed. Space-time stretches. It's the dogmatic minds of many that are inflexible, unwilling to open their mind to scientific discoveries such as that of Charles Darwin. Darwin worked for decades gathering evidence for his theory. He sought proof of a much more elusive natural process. Natural selection works over eons and shows itself in fossil records and in the genes of surviving life forms. Darwin would have marveled at the DNA molecule. He predicted that future scientists would find such a mechanism. Scientists have not discovered an organism that did not evolve from previous life forms by means of natural selection. Humans share much of their DNA with a banana, and share over 99% of their DNA with the chimpanzee. It is phenomenal that life can undergo such magnificent changes given enough time, but scientific observation confirms that life has evolved, and is evolving. Many people reject natural selection and mock Darwin because they feel his theory is incompatible with their belief in a specific notion of a creator at work in the universe, even though the evidence that life has evolved through natural selection is everywhere in nature. Some creationists associate Darwin with atheism and reject evolution through natural selection because of where it places man on Earth. Modern taxonomy places man next to gibbons on the tree of life. Homo sapiens are primates like the great apes. Some atheists cite Darwin's theories as evidence of the obsolescence of belief in God. Here the Darwin fish mocks the Christian ichthus. A fair view of the meaning of Darwin's work is often tainted by stigma and bias.
Well, look, it's people who are involved in this conflict between science and religion, between evolution and creation. And people have many motives. Many of those motives are quite noble. Some of their motives are not so noble. There are those who are advocates of evolution because they are atheists. And they draw the erroneous inference that if evolution is true, theistic belief is false. Richard Dawkins comes to mind. On the other hand, you have opponents of evolution who are advocates of theism. And they draw the erroneous conclusion that if the first two chapters of Genesis are not literally true, if the world was not created approximately 10,000 years ago, if life was not created basically in the same forms in which it appears today, that therefore the Bible is untrue and God does not exist. So you have ideologues from both sides who oftentimes are getting a great amount of attention, who are fueling this controversy, fanning the flame of controversy and dispute between science and creation.
Here's what the world needs. Wouldn't it be a tremendous blessing to walk into a major 50,000 square foot centre where visitors can learn that the Bible is true and that the Christian faith can be logically defended? Imagine walking into a creation museum and seeing the Bible's authority upheld and the gospel powerfully proclaimed, but not promoting evolution or millions of years, instead giving answers to these things.
Using biblical glasses, the museum will explain the real history of dinosaurs.
True history, biblical history.
And guests will be challenged to think biblically in all areas, putting on biblical glasses.
You know, people often say to me, for instance, how do you fit dinosaurs with the Bible? Well, my answer is you don't. You see, you don't take man's fallible interpretation of the evidence in the present and try to fit it to the Bible. That's why Christians don't have answers. But when you take the Bible as real history and you build your thinking on that, you can explain dinosaurs, and it makes sense of dinosaurs. And our thinking built upon the Bible fits with what we observe in the present world.
Individuals like Ken Ham and others, the so-called biblical creationists, those who oppose Darwinian evolution because of their commitment to a literally interpreted Bible, 10,000-year young earth creationism, that sort of thing, have very much a vested interest and much to gain personally by rejecting the theory of evolution. They would have much to lose if they were to reject a literal interpretation of the Bible. Much to lose personally, much to lose socially in terms of relationships with others, in terms of their ministry. Well, I think the first thing that's important to do is to distinguish intelligent design or intelligent design creationism from young earth creationism or biblical creationism. There's a lot of difference between the perspective and the ability of a William Dembski and the perspective and the ability of a Ken Ham. Intelligent design means different things to different people. Broadly speaking, as I understand it, intelligent design simply makes the point that time and chance alone are not sufficient to account for life as we know it, for the complexity of biological life. Because time and chance alone are not sufficient, one has to introduce, to have an adequate explanation, a designer, or a designer God, or some non-natural factor in addition to time, in addition to chance, that would adequately account for the complexity of biological life. Some intelligent design theorists affirm fairly literalistic views of creationism. Some intelligent design theorists see that intelligent design leads them into some kind of significant or necessary conflict with evolutionary theory. Other intelligent design theorists see no special need or requirement for a conflict with evolutionary theory. Theistic evolutionists can be included in a broad tent of intelligent design.
Today's decision involves the tiny town of Dover, Pennsylvania, but it is a major setback for those trying to limit the teaching of Darwinian evolution in public schools nationwide. During the 40-day trial before Judge Jones, school board members testified their religion had nothing to do with their desire to offer intelligent design, that they were motivated only by science. Judge Jones said that testimony was marked by selective memories and outright lies under oath. In Dover, residents remain split about intelligent design.
It's religious, and I think that it should be kept out of the school.
My child was very upset when they said that we were created from monkeys because he's very into his religion.
The Dover School Board that mandated intelligent design was voted out of office last November, but cases are pending in other states, and no one thinks this issue will be resolved anytime soon.
This is one of the great difficulties of intelligent design. First of all, even when they distinguish themselves from young earth creationists, they're often making common cause in the political realm with young earth creationists. So that in the minds of the public, intelligent design is simply identified with biblical creationism. One of the other difficulties that intelligent design faces is that, in fact, many young earth creationists who subscribe to biblical creationism are now calling themselves advocates of intelligent design, even though they advocate a very literal interpretation of Genesis, and they advocate views of the Bible and views of science that would not be shared by the major proponents of intelligent design, such as a Dembski or a Behe or others.
Board members who favored teaching intelligent design were voted out in Tuesday's elections. Matt, what do you think about this development?
I'd like to say to the good citizens of Dover, if there is a disaster in your area, don't turn to God. You just rejected him from your city. Don't ask for his help because he might not be there.
Darwin admitted the shame he felt for his theory. It conflicted directly with the religious dogma central to English society. Revolutionary thought has often challenged dogma. Copernicus discovered that the Earth orbited the Sun, but he kept it a secret until he was dying when it was finally published. Challenging dogma would have cost him dearly, perhaps his life.
There's another issue here, of claim on the side of the defenders of religious orthodoxy in explaining away evolution. And that is that there's some kind of a conspiracy by scientists that evolution is a religion of its own, it's an ideology. But is there a conspiracy? Can there be a conspiracy in science? Among scientists? No way. The entire culture of science is based on verifiable discovery.
Galileo felt strongly that the human mind was capable of understanding the universe through observation and experiment. In a sense, he was the first modern scientist, confirming the discovery of Copernicus, along with many other important discoveries in physics. His challenges to religious dogma brought him before the Inquisition. Galileo put his life on the line for science. Darwin's theory of natural selection is a fundamental principle of modern biology. Modern biology is the foundation of modern medicine. Most American Christians, instead of relying on prayer alone, send their loved ones to medical doctors when they are ill. Medical doctors are trained scientists who study evolutionary biology in our universities. Instead of appreciating the science and the observable facts, many religious fundamentalists see evolution through natural selection as an attack on religious dogma, and therefore they reject Darwinism outright. Many people, like Ken Ham, are caught in a 21st century conundrum. They live in a highly scientific age, enjoying the many benefits of technology, and yet they ignore or reject the same scientific knowledge that makes technology possible. It is possible to find people who reconcile science and spirituality, making room in their lives for both views of the universe. It would seem that education is a vital part of this process of reconciliation.
Well, people think about creation as something that happened. If they're creationists and biblical literalists, they think 4004 BC. And even scientists talk about the creation of the universe in 10 or 12 billion BC. But what the general vista of science shows is, of course, the world is creative all the time. New forms keep coming into existence. And in particular, we see this most strikingly in the whole epic of evolution, particularly biological evolution on the surface of the Earth. And this shows that God, as it were, made things made themselves, so the process of creation is an ongoing process, and that God just wasn't creator in the past, but is still creator now. God is creating, it's a present tense. And this restores to our understanding of God's relation to the world a sense of God's presence in, with and under the processes of the world. God is creating through the processes that science unveils.
As I see it, everyone has a personal philosophy. Everyone makes assumptions about right, wrong, good, bad, true, false. Insofar as people reflect upon what they believe on these matters, in a very broad sense, they are doing philosophy. Not everyone is interested in pursuing these questions to their deepest or highest levels, but some people are. And I think it's important that some people dig deep into these questions and pursue these questions and try to fill out our understanding of our lives and our place in the universe. For those who do that sort of thing, for those who engage in those sorts of philosophical investigations, I think it's important to take into account and to take quite seriously what science is telling us about the nature of the universe, what science is telling us about the nature and origins of life. Science itself tells us it will not give us the final word. Science makes mistakes. Science is self-correcting. Science may ultimately be inadequate to answer all the legitimate questions that we would like to ask. But science is a very important voice in the conversation. At the same time, I think philosophy is an important voice. I think that spirituality is an important voice to the conversation. And in any adequate worldview, I think you're going to want to construct a consistent perspective on life and upon the universe, and you're going to want to listen to all of the voices that have a part in the conversation, including and especially the voice of science.
Why is there existence at all? Why is there a universe at all? We get so involved in whether there's evolution or whether there is an evolution. Is the universe billions of years or millions of years or thousands of years old? All these questions are totally secondary to the most fundamental conundrum of all, that of existence. The Big Bang did not produce one iota of solid matter. It produced light beams, super energetic light beams, electromagnetic radiation. And these light beams eventually became alive. Now, it is quite a stretch of the imagination that light beams can become alive by themselves, but all of physics holds by that.
Modern scientists view the universe through an evolutionary lens. Our universe started with the Big Bang and has been evolving ever since. In our ever-expanding universe, clouds of stellar dust coalesce into nebulae, which give birth to stars. Stars die in supernovae. Their remains spread about the expanse of space, and the cycle begins anew. Many generations of stars resulted in the stardust that contained the elements essential for life on Earth. It is impossible to venture into cosmology without noticing the evidence for both creation and evolution in the universe.
One of the things that's encouraging to me in the work of scholars like Arthur Peacock and John Polkinghorne and others is that these are individuals who are not only very theologically literate and accomplished, but they are scientifically literate and accomplished. And the fact is that individuals like Peacock, individuals like Polkinghorne, see no necessary conflict between good science and good theology. If there's a conflict between science and theology, it's either because perhaps we're encountering some bad theology or we're encountering some bad science. Or perhaps we're simply at the stage where we're dealing with a conflict and we need to do better theology and better science so as to resolve the conflict. Too often the protagonists, the antagonists in these debates are persons who are not particularly literate from a theological point of view, or they're not particularly literate from a scientific point of view. If you're literate scientifically but not theologically, you can make some pretty boneheaded statements about religion. If you're literate theologically perhaps, but not scientifically, you can make some pretty ignorant statements about science. And then unfortunately, there are people involved in the debate who are pretty ignorant on both sides, and who make pretty ignorant statements about science and theology. But the encouraging thing to me is that there are those who are scientifically literate, theologically literate, who have no ideological commitments, who are open to going where evidence and reason and spirituality seems to lead them. And these individuals are not finding an ultimate antagonism between science and religion, between evolution and creation, but they are seeing that there is an ultimate affinity of the two. There's an ultimate affirmation of both and a denial of neither.
Reflecting on the universe and the way that science has now revealed what kind of universe it is, and this whole sweep of cosmic and biological and the epic of evolution, reflecting on that, how this points towards a source of this kind of existence other than ourselves, but which is embedded in it, which in English, which is the ultimate reality, but which in English we use the word God for. But what we mean by God, of course, has got to be elaborated. This isn't so different from what goes on in science. The word electron, when it was first invented, they thought it was some kind of little particle, because by a magnetic and electric field it moved in a certain way, and they got its charge to mass ratio. Subsequently, if they let that little beam of so-called particles go through a crystal of nickel, then it got diffracted, and they said, oh, it seems to be behaving like a wave, so what is it? They still use the word electron to refer to it, but their understanding had now been widened. If you ask a theoretical physicist what an electron is, they will say, they won't be able to say what it is in itself. They say, well, it's like this, it does this, and certain things are true to be said of it. And I think the word God is rather like that. We don't ever will know what God is in God's self, because by definition God is greater than that which we can conceive. But what is going on, I think, is elaboration of our understanding of that to which the word God refers.
If the general picture, however, of a Big Bang followed by an expanding universe is correct, what happened before that? Was the universe devoid of all matter, and then the matter suddenly somehow created? How did that happen? In many cultures, the customary answer is that a god or gods created the universe out of nothing. But if we wish to pursue this question courageously, we must, of course, ask the next question. Where did God come from? If we decide that this is an unanswerable question, why not save a step and conclude that the origin of the universe is an unanswerable question? Or, if we say that God always existed, why not save a step and conclude that the universe always existed, that there's no need for a creation, it was always here? These are not easy questions.
Those asking courageous philosophical questions may wonder, in Darwin's process of natural selection, who is doing the selecting? Does nature make a choice? Does nature have a mind? If natural laws dictate our existence, who conceived these laws and why? Can nature select which path to take, the crossroads of life?
You have an atom of uranium, it sits there on the table, and then tomorrow it's gone. It's decayed into thorium plus an alpha particle. But nobody can predict whether or not that's going to happen today or tomorrow, or it may take 1 billion years. So that the atom seems to have a freedom to choose. And that's something which characterizes quantum processes, that they seem to just occur spontaneously. We call that spontaneous decay. So it's spontaneous. That, to my mind, implies that the thing makes a choice.
It does appear that human beings have emerged with all sorts of capacities, but the capacity to think, and the capacity to create, the capacity to imagine conceptually, and create new concepts, new images conceptually, and the capacity to relate to God. And that's what I take as a spiritual capacity, to relate consciously to God. Mm-hmm. This is the question I would put to one's atheist acquaintances. How do you explain the existence of a world in which quark soup, whatever it was, a fluctuation in a quantum field or whatever it was, initiated the hot Big Bang, is capable of producing, out of its by natural processes, creatures with these capacities?
The direction our science is going today is actually coming very close to this Vedantic or Buddhist perspective.
Absolutely.
Sending someone email or surfing on the internet or using a cell phone, all these technologies are based on a very fundamental premise in science. And that fundamental premise in science is that the essential nature of the material world is that it's not material. Not only is it non-stuff, it's thinking non-stuff. Because if you go into the atom and you go beyond the atom, which is the basis of all our technology, what do you find? You find an empty void. And this empty void is not a nothingness, it's the womb of creation.
God, to me, does mean something. It's such a mystery. We have some instinct of a mind at work in the universe. God simply is a mind that's gone beyond the scale of our understanding.
Intelligent design, whether we're referring to the design of the universe or whether we're referring to the design of biological organisms, is, I think, a legitimate question. It's worthy of consideration, worthy of exploration. The issue is this a scientific question? Is this a scientific discipline? At present, I would say no, it's not science. But it is a legitimate philosophical question, worthy of being explored by philosophers and by those who would seek to think philosophically.
This is Wald, direct quote, in the International Journal of Quantum Chemistry, 1984. It has occurred to me lately, and I must confess with some shock at first to my scientific sensibilities, that the questions of the origin of consciousness in humans and the origin of life from non-living matter might be brought to some degree of congruence. This is with the assumption that mind, rather than emerging as a late outgrowth in the evolution of life, has in fact existed always as the matrix, the source and condition of the physical reality. That stuff of which physical reality is composed is mind stuff. It is mind that has composed the physical universe, that breeds life, and so eventually evolves creatures that know and create science and art and technology. These animals, humans, in them the universe begins to know itself. You witnessed the creation of the universe. You were present at the creation, not in your bodily form, but in the form of light beams that eventually became alive, learned to send people to the moon, learned to create a violin concerto that can so beautiful it can move a person to tears, all from condensed light beams. It's quite a stretch of the imagination that this merely happened by itself.
Nowhere, no matter where the computer programmers go with their sophisticated feedback loops, nowhere in that model, unless you explain consciousness, nowhere is there an explanation for what we call free will, or insight, or intention, or imagination, or inspiration, or creativity, or knowingness, or understanding, or decision-making, or meaning. No matter how sophisticated artificial intelligence becomes, doesn't lie in the program. It lies in the consciousness of the programmer.
DNA itself is complex, but it's a closed book. The real complexity of life is not in the DNA. The real complexity of life is the reading of the DNA, of which, of course, the DNA is self-structured to develop a system that can read it. The reading of the DNA, the complexity of life, is overwhelming.